Hi everyone who's on and who's watching. My name's Iku. I'm a community organizer with Montana Women Vote, and welcome to the 15th Annual Women's Policy Leadership Institute. The Women's Policy Leadership Institute is a program of Montana Women Vote. Montana Women Vote works statewide to engage low-income women and families, LGBTQ folks, Two-Spirit and non-binary folks, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in the democratic process as informed voters, policy advocates, and community leaders. We're grateful for the moderator, Danny, and for all the panelists who are going to share with us today, and that you're able to be here with us. We hope the information presented will inform your efforts in your community, and we look forward to staying connected with you as we work together to advance state policy that works for low-income Montanans. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's event. This panel is webinar style, so you will be muted automatically and you won't be able to unmute yourself without permission. To request to be unmuted, click the microphone icon in the bottom left corner or press *6 if you're on the phone. You can also ask questions and talk with other participants using the chat or the Q&A. The Q&A is anonymous and will typically be reviewed during the Q&A portion of the agenda, although we do look at them throughout just in case there's a really easy answer. And let's see. You also have the option to turn captions on or off. I put that in the chat. I can put it in there again because more folks just joined. But to turn captions on or off and adjust the size of your captions, you click on the arrow by the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have any questions or technical difficulties, you can put them in the chat or call our staff at 406-317-1505. And at the end, we're going to ask you to complete a short evaluation of the session and let us know your thoughts. At the end of the eval, you can put your name and email in there, and we have a Visa gift card or Horsefly Dress, which is a book of poetry by Heather Cahoon, as raffle items. Okay. And then let me drop the land acknowledgement in here. Okay, so before we begin, we also want to acknowledge that what is currently called Montana has a unique history with settler colonialism. That colonization of what is currently called Montana is very recent and that there are a lot of fresh wounds. Today, Montana has 8 sovereign native nations within its borders. So there's 8 nations within its borders and 12 federally recognized tribes. If you registered and received our packet, you have a map that OPI created that shows current reservations and then boundaries created by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 and the Flathead and Blackfeet Treaties of 1855. Arguably the first permanent white settlement, although white people did come here in 1803, I think, Lewis and Clark, but arguably the first permanent settlement was 1841 at St. Mary's Mission, which is now Stevensville. And so that's only been within the last 200 years, which is a very short amount of time, just generations. And so we want to acknowledge that ever since first contact, extreme strife has been forced upon Indigenous communities in this area. Following first contact between white folks and Indigenous folks of this area came smallpox, forts, wars and massacres, missionaries, boarding schools, homesteaders, forced relocation, forced segregation on reservations, and so many more things. The lives of Native people have been forever altered as we continue to exist in a space with more and more settlers moving onto our homelands that were violently taken from us so recently. We also want to acknowledge that many Asian Americans and Black Americans have experienced extreme discrimination in this state, and that they have also had flourishing communities in many of the cities of Montana whose history has been all but erased. Just for a little extra context, Black people, Indigenous people, and Asian people have all been lynched in Montana. And so we're all survivors of genocide, ongoing colonization, and discrimination. And there's also power and love in our communities, and we all deserve joy. And we deserve to express ourselves, to find ourselves, to self-actualize, and to see ourselves in the current world and in the world future. So with that, I'd like to introduce moderator Danny Vasquez. Danielle is her government name. She is Slytherin House with a Ravenclaw moon. She's also Chippewa Cree from Rocky Boy, got her social work degree at UM, is just a super smart and compassionate person. and has also studied art before. She's going to be a great moderator, and I love having her as a coworker. And with that, Danny.
Thank you, EQ. That is like so nice. I didn't think I was gonna cry, but might. Just kidding. Hello everyone. Yes, Danielle Vasquez is my government name. You can call me Danny. Yeah. Yeah. So first, I guess, kind of going off of what Iku said, I do want to acknowledge, you know, the pain and, you know, the devastation and the violence and the very real suffering that has happened and is continuing to happen. You know, you have this racial strife, compounded by a deadly pandemic that has disproportionately affected Black communities, Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, Asian communities, low-income folks, and incarcerated people. And you know, COVID has really just like exacerbated all of these like societal problems, you know, the social ills, and you know, caused a lot of like disconnect, and you know, not just physically, but across the board, a lot of different aspects. And you know, it's definitely been a time of great loss and mourning. And I think for a lot of us, you know, there's been this sort of grief in the background of most days, and you know, sometimes it's quiet, and you know, sometimes it's screaming. And I think for me personally, as is probably true for most of you, I really turned to art in this time, you know, to process like what is going on around me, but also, you know, just to distract myself. And so be it, you know, books, music, movies, podcasts. If you all know me, you know that I am not a podcast person because I have the attention span of like a 5-year-old. But yeah, I actually, during this pandemic, was listening to podcasts. Anyways, all that to say that I think, you know, art really does have, you know, you know, this power to, you know, really reach across different groups of people, um, people who hold, you know, different identities and experiences, you know, the ability to reach across different age groups, you know, the ability to connect people in a time when, you know, we are really disconnected. And you know, it really gives us the ability to tell our stories and our histories, and to change and shape a, a narrative. Um, and, you know, tying that back, so Montana Women Vote, we actually do have storytelling efforts. And yeah, we use storytelling a lot in our programming. And I won't go too much into that. But if you want to know more about that, join us this Saturday at 2, and we'll go into that. Anyways, stories are what make us human, and you know, how you change worldviews, and how you can transform culture, which brings me to my next point. what is culture? Um, and I'm not really referring, when I say culture, I'm not really referring to, this mainstream dominant societal culture. Rather, this definition of culture, really it centers on the ways our communities, or like historically marginalized communities, have maintained and um, transmitted our values. And this definition includes our traditions and our belief systems and our ways of living and our ways of knowing, um, and further, um, our ways of reclaiming and healing and thriving under these conditions of theft and suppression and erasure. And so, by its nature, culture is messy, it's very nuanced, and these histories of, settler colonialism, forced migration, enslavement, segregation, war, genocide, just all that ugly stuff. Our stories and our cultures are really concentrated with resistance, and they really do bear the marks of our history and our trauma. And on the other side of that, our cul- our cultures and our stories really do lift up our visions and our yearnings and resilient efforts for liberation. I think um, it's freeing, to be able to tell your own story. Um, and so memory, both collective and public, is an important part of culture. And, I think that's why we need to acknowledge it. Um, and so now that we've kind of, briefly explored concepts of art and culture, we come to this concept of cultural strategy. And essentially, cultural strategy is the practice that makes social change possible. And so it's bringing this intersection of art and culture and using it to move people to action, to fight apathy. It helps us to see the different relationships between people and the land and animals, and relationships with ourselves. It helps us to, discover new truths and to shift and redistribute power by, populating these stories, these narratives, these art forms, practices, and ideas that actively disrupt and go against its dominant power structures. And so and then eventually affects how resources are distributed and how people are governed. So um, I meant to make a slideshow for this, but um, I didn't. So that's my bad. But I'm a visual person, so I kind of think of it as three little pods. So in one you have culture and worldview, and then another pod it's politics and governance, and then in another pod it's economics, or resources. And so they're always working together, and that's essentially what cultural strategy is. But anyways, all of this, this isn't new. This concept isn't new. It's kind of work that we've been doing, for a long time. And so I was when I was thinking of this panel and what I wanted to do with it, or the direction I wanted to go with it. I really just wanted to kind of find and uplift the people that are doing this work already. And so I guess it's my honor and my privilege to introduce our panelists, folks who are doing this work, this really important work currently. And so I'll start by introducing the amazing Ivy McDonald, a Blackfeet filmmaker, just all around awesome person. And then Monica Gillis Brings Yellow, a self-taught Indigenous artist based out of Missoula, Montana. And then we have Anne Derrick Gayo, who is a freelance journalist. And then we have Shadow Devereaux, who is a hip hop artist out of who is Salish and Blackfeet from the Flathead Reservation. And so I did really brief intros because I want to hand it over to you all to kind of go more, to kind of just like describe more of your work, what you do, and kind of like what brought you to this work, who or what influenced you. And so I don't know if who wants to go first. I could pick someone, but you guys. Monica? Okay. No?
Okay, I'm fine. I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me? I should be good, right? Okay. So I'm Monica Gillis Brings Yellow. Hold on, the light in my house is really weird, so let me, whatever. And I live in Missoula, Montana. And like Danny said, I am a self-taught artist. I started painting, I think, what month is it? It's the longest year ever. Like about a year and a half ago, going on like a year and like 7 months or something like that. I came to painting because I graduated from grad school, and in grad school I was getting my master's in social work. So I was kind of used to just like, I don't know, I call it lighting myself on fire, where I would go to work from, like 9 to 5, or usually it was way longer than that, and then come home from work and then study and write and try to learn about being a clinician until, like 2 a.m. after I get done with a full work day. And so I graduated and kind of all of a sudden had all of this extra free time on my hands, and didn't really know what I was going to do with it. And then I was offered a new job as a therapist, and I am a therapist in group homes for kids. And I wanted some cool art to put in my house, but I couldn't, and in my office, but I couldn't afford anything that I liked that I also thought was an appropriate representation of Native people or Indigenous people. And then the things I could afford, I didn't enjoy. I was like, that's not great. I could do that. Even though at the time I had no, like, I was just full of myself. There was no proof that I could do this, right? So I just started experimenting with art, and experimenting with different types of painting, and researched people on like the internet and on YouTube and Instagram, and kind of picked and chose individual styles that I liked and started putting them together. And that's kind of where I'm at now. And so I get the opportunity to paint. I usually paint Indigenous people. I usually paint relatives if I can swing it. I'm running out of relatives because I'm painting a lot of people. And my family is from the Flathead Reservation, and they are mostly Salish. So I started incorporating people that I wanted to look at, and I wanted to tell their stories, and it just kind of took off from there. So that's all I have, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, Shadow, do you want to go next?
Sure, I can go next. Can everybody hear me well? Okay, my name is Shadow Devereaux. I'm a Salish and Blackfeet indigenous person from grown and raised on the Flathead Reservation. I'm a hip hop artist, and I've kind of, I kind of started doing my work, basically self-taught from, I guess you would call it, trying to vent or trying to cope with my own struggles, and which has turned into me relating with all of this youth and all of these other indigenous peoples that also have the same types of struggles. And so I started from just wanting to write rap music and make rap music to doing it with more of a purpose outside of myself. And so I've come a long ways, and I really enjoy what I do now. As of now, I work with a lot of the Montana Native youth and helping them, feel safe in identifying themselves as Native rappers or Native artists, even as far as, you don't have to identify as a rapper, but any sort of a musical endeavor as a indigenous person. And I really got a lot of my inspiration from my sister, Turquoise Devereaux, and she's helped me a ton in going in this direction. And it's been such a great journey learning, what our Native youth endures and kind of what I endured too, and relating those things through music and through presentation. But as far as work goes, I'm doing a lot of stuff. Like I have a program, Healing Through Music, and that's basically geared around the youth and using music as a tool to feel comfortable and release through music. Also, people who relate through music, and so it's been quite the journey, learning and also using my skills to project that for others to relate to.
Awesome, thank you. Anne, please tell us more about all of the awesome work you do.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you for having me here. I really, I'm nervous, but I'm excited to be on this panel with such awesome people. My name is Anne Derrick-Gaillot. I'm Black, I'm Haitian, I'm an East Coast girl, but I've been living in Missoula for the past 4 years. I'm a freelance journalist. I am a culture journalist. I've done a lot of different kinds of writing, but my favorite things to do is just write about culture, write stories about different communities. I interview a lot of artists for different publications, which is another thing that is, those are my favorite assignments. And I think I came to culture journalism and music journalism just through being nosy. After college, I started working for a street newspaper, and through that, I did a lot of profiles of people experiencing homelessness who worked for the paper, and then moved on to writing about activists in Portland, where I lived at the time. And then now I just write a lot about artists and do some cultural critique and just a bunch of things. But my main focus right now, outside of the things I do for money, is I'm trying to write a zine about Black history in Missoula. So that's been taking up most of my brain time, and I'm hoping to get that out soon. But yeah, that's basically what I do. Thank you for having me.
That is awesome. And I really do look forward to that zine. Ivy, tell us a little bit more about what you're working on.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you, Danny. So my name is Ivy MacDonald. I'm a documentary filmmaker and activist. I'm currently working on my first feature-length documentary with my brother called When They Were Here, which deals with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis within the state of Montana. And I'm also currently working on a docu-series for Showtime that's going to be set on the Crow Reservation. And another project that I can't really talk about right now until maybe like a few months or when it's really set in stone. Yeah, so I kind of always knew that I wanted to do filmmaking or be a filmmaker. I remember watching Titanic, funny enough, when I was like 8 years old, and I was like so blown away by it, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I remember a few years later, I asked my parents to get me a video camera. And so I got one for Christmas, and I just kind of, filmed. At the time. It was funny. My first introduction to documentary was actually the Jackass show, and stuff. And so like I grew up, doing like just recording random stuff like that. And I used to, funny enough, last night, my younger sister, I didn't think that any of my family members remembered me doing this, but I used to, I didn't know how to write screenplays and I didn't know really what they were, but I remember I used to like sit and read or sit with the subtitles on the film, and then I would like write in the notebook, and I had like a whole, like, it wasn't a script, but it was just like all of the dialogue. And my sister brought it up yesterday, and I was like, oh, that's funny. I used to do that when I was like 12 or 13, but not knowing what screenplay was. Yeah, and then I've always been fascinated by film. And then one day I just kind of like woke up and was just like, I'm going to go to film school. I'm going to try it out and see what happens. And so I ended up applying to the film program in UM, and you had to do like a year before you got in. So they had to like kind of decide if you were, I guess, good enough to get in, which is kind of shitty. But got in, and then I graduated. And it wasn't until like my last year of college where I really got into documentary. I had this amazing professor named Talina Sanders, and she kind of introduced me into the world of documentary and that. And then how our film came to be is that my brother, my last semester in college, I was taking a documentary class and we had to make a documentary. And my brother approached me because he was getting his master's in social work and was like, hey, do you think we could do a film about this? And so we shot it like 3 weekends. And then I had to edit the film in 3 days. And that was the shorter version of the longer version that we're doing of When They Were Here. And at the time when we did the film, we didn't realize it was the first MMIW documentary made in the US. And it wasn't until we realized after, like when we started working on our feature-length documentary, that that's, kind of where it started. But yeah, so I'm just excited to be here and looking forward to more questions.
Awesome. All of that is just like so amazing. Again, I mentioned this last Friday when we met. I feel like on Monsters Inc., when those two like monsters, like they see like Sully come in and like all of the monsters coming in and they're like, oh my God, they're so cool. Like that is me. I'm like fangirling. This is amazing. And thank you all for your work. I think it's very important. And so, yeah, I guess I'll move us along. And so, yeah, I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and kind of bring in, social justice. And I think like that's just a loaded concept, but I guess my question is, do you all see your work as social justice work? And I guess it's a two-part question. And um, if so, I guess, or maybe not, that's not the right way to say it, but do you see your work being used to affect policy work, advocacy work, or, campaigns? And so I feel like I'm like, I don't want to pick on anyone, but Shadow, you want to go?
Sure, I'll go first. To address the first question, yeah, I do feel like what I do is a little bit of social justice work. A lot of the tribal communities and tribal groups of kids and such and adults, they don't get quite the attention that needs to be brought to them. And so I feel like what I do helps bring attention to mental health and to also cultural identity. And a lot of, I try to eliminate where the stereotypical things where Native Americans, are seen as people who live in teepees and dance in powwows. And I try to get rid of that and try to make it more of a it's an everything type thing for us natives. As far as rapping goes, as far as what I do goes, as far as music goes, I try to just bring a little more normalcy to my type of work, and try to make kids and other adults feel like it's okay to do this type of thing and have this type of journey, rather than feel like they're geared towards one thing or another. And so yeah.
Cool, thank you. Anne, do you want to speak a little bit to that question?
Yeah, this is kind of a tough one for me because I think some of my work is in a social justice framework, but also sometimes I just write things for money because I need money because I need to pay my bills. But yes, I right now I'm a contributor to the International Network of Street Newspapers, which street newspapers, if you're not familiar, they're sold in different cities, and people who are experiencing poverty or homelessness sell the papers for a profit. And basically most of the papers cover social justice issues in whatever the cities are. So when I'm covering things for that paper, when I'm covering local communities, when I'm covering just things like interesting stories about power dynamics that I want to shed a light on, then I do think my work has a social justice component. But more outside of that, I feel like all of my work, no matter what I'm doing, I always want it to be in line with my responsibility to my communities. So I always want to be uplifting Black people. I always want to be covering, whenever I can, queer people, Haitian people. I love being Haitian, by the way. So I'm always trying to cover Haitian people and musicians and artists. And just anyone that I think, if I'm not going to write about them, if I think they're important and I don't think anyone else is going to write about them, and I feel like I need to, then I do feel like I'm contributing to changing the overall narrative of what's important. Because when you're a writer, and I think for all of us as artists, whatever you choose to focus on or shed a light on, even if you don't have a huge audience, you're still showing that you think this is important and you think that this needs to have more power. So I feel like in that regard, I do just always want to keep my writings focused on what responsibilities I have to my community. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I've never actually heard of street newspapers. And that's awesome. And going to look into that after this panel.
I think, sorry, I'm going to talk more.
Go
I think
for it.
too,
Yeah.
as you like have a platform too, like the decisions of what you want to shed, like bring attention to becomes even more paramount. And I feel like, I don't know, I'm sure Ivy can relate to that, as like having so many eyes on your projects, especially now working with Showtime, like what you choose to cover or talk about just takes on so much more weight, I guess, sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah. Ivy, you wanna expand more on that?
Yeah, so specifically with our film and like the work that we do in general for missing and murdered Indigenous women, our whole concept is, you know, these, and a lot of times these women fall through the cracks and they're only seen as what happened to them in their death. They're not seen as mothers, daughters, sisters, you know, someone that, or family members that, you know, were loved when they were here and stuff. And so a lot of our work focuses on um, healing, and not necessarily, and it doesn't focus on like what happened to these women, but it focuses on like the families and the healing that they go through. And a lot of the times, me and Ivan say it, that especially in filmmaking, or in documentary, the documentary world, we actually are doing a fellowship right now for Firelight Media, and we just had a discussion about this, but there's this idea of how when you're making films in the United States or like the Western kind of culture, that they want everything explained. So they want like an expert, or they want someone to help break it down for people who aren't part of that community. But we always say that the experts are the family members who have gone through this. They're the ones living it in day to day. And, you know, that's all well that you want to explore that stuff, like, but I think when you focus too much on that, it takes away from these women, and it takes away from these girls and what happened to them, and the loss that their family feels for generations. And so yeah, I think a lot of our work is, you know, based in social justice. And two, I think for especially me and Ivan and how we do things, it's not just, there's kind of this concept of like extractive filmmaking, and that's not what we're doing. And there's kind of like this shift going on in documentary world right now, where a lot of people of color are doing this, when a lot of, you know, we're taking back our narratives. You know, for years it's been white people telling our stories, and now that we have our platforms and are given the chance, we're able to change what people think and how they see. And like, especially for us, like indigenous like storytelling is so based on oral history and remembrance and memories. And so with our work too, specifically, is that we don't just stop at taking these stories and not doing anything with the families or the community after, you know, like, I guess with my more activism side is that, you know, I do a lot of like, you know, if a family member needs help on searches, I go help on searches. If a family member is doing a march, I try and show up for it. Or even when Marita Growing Thunder was doing her walk across the Salish, you know, the Flathead Reservation, I was with her all 4 days. You know, like, it's not just going in, taking these stories and not doing anything after. It's actively trying to combat this crisis any way we possibly can. And hopefully through the way we're doing it and how we want to tell this story, that it could definitely change a lot of people's minds and what they see Indigenous women as and how they feel about them.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Monica, do you kind of want to speak to the question?
Sure. So I guess for the answer, is this social justice work? The simple answer is yes. And the long answer is that like a billion years ago, I used to be a teacher. And my first year teaching, I was over in Lame Deer on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And so that was a different place because I was used to living on the Flathead Reservation, and the Northern Cheyenne Reservation's really, it's just different. So I'd go over there, and a lot of times in like Western art, you have this romanticization of Indian people, and with like America in general, where it's just like, oh, the romantic savage, and they'll make paintings of natives and indigenous people, and they don't say what tribe they're from. They don't talk about who they are. It's just this like overall glossed over view of people that we don't have to worry about anymore because they're no longer here, right? So I would go to Lame Deer, and I taught there for, I think it was just like a year. And especially in history circles and in Native history circles, people are like, oh my gosh, the Northern Cheyenne, right? Because of the Battle of the Little Bighorn and their role there. So people really like to romanticize the Cheyenne and the Sioux, and sometimes the Crow as well, and their role in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, right? And you know, if you go to a Western art show, that's who's getting painted, that's who's getting drawn, and it's usually not drawn by Indian people. It's usually drawn by people that are outside the culture, and they aren't bringing any of the cultural references into it, and they're solely profiting over it, right? And then the other thing that happened that I already knew was going to happen even before I got to Lame Deer is that you have the Northern Cheyenne tribe that is really romanticized, and people are like, oh my gosh, you know, Chief Little Wolf, and they go through and they're like, these guys are so amazing. And then you would take the grandkids of these romanticized Indians on like a field trip to Billings, and the same people that would pay a lot of money for a painting of somebody that was Native would treat the grandkids of those people like crap. So I wanted to make paintings of people that I enjoyed, and I also wanted to use my paintings as a way to almost be like, I guess, like an iron glove that's covered in a velvet, or an iron fist that's covered in a velvet glove. Like I make a beautiful painting, and I draw you in, and I want to do that in order to tell you the story that's behind all of it, and do it in a way that is culturally respectful and relevant, and that also gives somebody, these people, the honor that they deserve. So that's why I choose to paint who I choose to paint. And yeah, I think that's social justice work because I'm inadvertently and purposefully educating people on culture, and that certain policies that were enacted had real life consequences for people that still like exist today. And so that's kind of what I've done. Right now, I actually am part of an exhibition at the Emerson, and it's an all-female exhibition, and it's all centered on MMIW. And so everybody submitted work, and it's going until I think the end of February, but it might become a traveling exhibition. I'm hoping to get my second vaccination shot and then head on over there before they take it down. But I think you guys should check it out, because it's actual relatives of the people that are affected by missing, murdered, and Indigenous women who are making art, and they're doing it as a way to heal and also, you know, bring awareness.
Awesome. Yeah, that that's all like just amazing. And so I guess, yeah, you all kind of were touched on this next question, but I'm just going to ask, and if you all, something comes to you. So what kind of impact do you hope to make with your art? You know, what stereotypes are you actively trying to change, or, you know, eradicate, you know, or what is this narrative that you're hoping to change? And so, like I said, some of you kind of answered that already, but you know, is if you want to add more to that, and I Shadow, if you want to speak more about that.
Sure. Just a second. My son's in here running around. River. What?
Help me get a auto.
I'll be out in just a second.
Give me a red one and
1 second.
Okay, you can Ivy, I know you talked a lot about you know, this narrative, you know, humanizing these people, which I think is like just super important, because, you know, in this whole crisis, I think you know, a lot of people just like they're like these women, these people, they're kind of like, just, I don't know what the word is, like whittled down to like numbers, which, like, yeah, no, that's not it. So and, you know, in addition to that, you know, what other stereotypes, or like what narratives are you hoping to change with your films, your activism?
Yeah, I think specifically hitting on the idea of like this kind of revolutionary change in documentary in the way that um you know, people who are the kind of like the holders or the keepers of the money, like when you're applying for grants and stuff, and kind of this idea that documentary, specifically with people of color and how they tell stories, or uh, indigenous storytelling, is that it sometimes it's not just like a, you know, 3-act structure. It's not just beginning, middle, end. And that's the thing with, specifically with, you know, MMIW, is that there's no type of end to it. Like, in a way of like, these families, they're going to feel this hurt and this loss, you know, and they're going to be days where they're okay, all of this stuff. And so sort of like showing that, because, you know, a lot of the kind of discussions we've had with people is like, well, what's the end? What's the arc? What's this? And trying to get them to understand that there's a lot of certain aspects that just don't really fit into sort of what people really want, and sort of like shying away from the fact, because, you know, a lot of the times people ask about like, oh, like true crime type of thing, which it, you know, in the United States, that's, people like that stuff, you know, that's what we're shying away from, because kind of like what you said, Danny, like these women are just held to what they were when, you know, like one of the stories that we follow, Lynette Keener, when she was murdered at the Super 8 hotel here in Missoula, the only thing was wrote about her was that she was just a housekeeper, and that was it. You know, that was the end of her story. But, you know, she was much more than that. She had a family, she had grandkids, and, you know, trying to get people to understand that, you know, specifically with this crisis, that it's been going on since colonization. It's nothing new, you know. It's not this kind of phenomenon that's happening right now. It's that, you know, it's not something to kind of just like grab a hold of. But, you know, that's why I think this idea of like doing activism plus trying to create change in artwork and what people see and how they see it and how they view, you know, Indigenous people in general, and especially women and the women and girls.
Thank you. Yeah, that's just, yeah, some really, really deep stuff. And yeah, it does, you know, there's this narrative, and I think, you know, Monica really touched on it earlier, you know, that I feel like in mainstream society, like Indigenous people are looked at as, you know, a people of the past, you know, that we're not still here, like literally still here. But for sure. And so again, uh, going back to, you know, the impact you're hoping to make with your work, you know, this different narratives. And is there anything else you want to add, you know, just in hearing everyone else speak about, you know, their art? If there's anything you want to add.
I think I can really relate to what everyone's been saying about wanting to humanize people and tell people's stories and just present them as whole, complex human beings that don't fit easily into maybe a stereotypical box. I think a lot of my work has been like trying to find rootedness in place or community, especially as an immigrant. So I think one of my goals is to just illuminate that things that we think don't have a history or don't have a place or don't have reasons for do, which is why I really want to finish sometime this zine about Black history in Montana. I think people often, you know, if you're a Black person here, they're like, what are you doing here? Which is totally, you know, whenever I see another Black person, I ask them the same thing. But I think especially as young people, we kind of forget that people have gone through the same things that we have before. We've basically, I think I'm losing my train of thought, but I want to change the narrative that Black people don't have a history in certain places, or that just things are just the way they are without any historical reason or any lead up to that. I think that that's another way of sort of this project to humanize people and tell people's stories as complex, full human beings.
Yeah, for sure. And also I blame the US school system. Just kidding. Because
no, 100%.
Yeah, no, I never learned about Black history here in Montana, you know. It's like, why do Black people only make up not even 1% of the population in Montana? Anyway, anyways, Monica, do you have anything you want to add?
Other than I used to be a history teacher and I also blame the school system. No, I think, let me think if I do or if I don't. I don't think, what was the original question, Danny?
I guess it was just kind of going, you know, like, so you all sort of, you know, began talking about, you know, the impact that you want to make with your work, you know, in changing, like eradicating stereotypes, and changing the narrative around, you know, certain issues. I was just asking if you have anything else you want to add to that. But I guess, I mean, if you don't, if you want to talk a little bit more about what the reception has been to your work thus far. I mean, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about both, I guess. So just a little extra thing. I think the goal in a lot of my work is education. and kind of like bringing people in. And I think I already probably said this before, but like you read about, if you're lucky, if you're kind of lucky, you read about certain acts that were passed in Congress and throughout history, and that you just gloss over them, right? And so you read about Indian removal, and you read about like the Dawes Act, and most people, I think, that are in public education or just education in general, they just are like, okay, all right, well, that's an act, whatever, and don't realize that it had actual impacts on actual people. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do, is like talk about when like our great grandparents and grandparents were alive, how the acts affected their lives, and talk about things like sending people to boarding school. I didn't know until like recently, for some reason in my head, I thought that in Montana, if you went to boarding school, you got to come back. And a lot of people never saw their families again after they were moved at like age 4 or 5. And just thinking about what that does to like people's attachment and how attachment affects things later on in life, like your ability to process emotions and addiction and all these other things. And so that's something that I want to keep working on and keep working in general. And then what was the next question, Danny? I am so distracted today.
Oh, no, you're fine. I think we're all a little distracted. At least I am. Just, what has been the reception to your art? If you want to talk a little bit about that.
A little, like when I first started out, people sometimes would say things like, oh, I see what you're doing there. Oh, I know I have a cousin that does stuff like that. Or or my daughter does something like this. And I was like, well then, or like, oh, I've seen that before. I think, I could do this too. And I was like, well, you should go do it then. But now, that was like when I first started out, and it was just a couple people that I assume were probably unhappy, like in their personal lives. But now the reception is also like really, really positive. Like it's sometimes shockingly positive, where people will be like, this artwork is amazing, this piece is amazing. I'm like, really? You're not like catfishing me, are you? Like you're not just, blowing smoke. But lately the reception has been like really positive. And lots of people, like I've gotten to meet lots of people and have gotten to meet lots of other artists, including like right now, because of the reception.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, your art is awesome. I think it's been a long time coming that there is art in Missoula that reflects the history of Missoula, because you ask any like white person and they're like, what, this is Salish land? Just kidding.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I ended up on the traffic box, because I had never done public art before. And so I don't know if all of you know me. I have a traffic box. It's on Broadway and Madison on the bridge that goes to the university. Oh, have you seen it, Shadow? And so that's all people that I found that are from the Flathead Reservation, because that's what I understood was going on in Missoula. People didn't have any idea who had lived here before. And they look on the map sometimes, and sometimes the maps aren't accurate. And I'm like, no, dude, like there's pictures where people are living where the oval is. Like, and that's just where things are. Like you're supposed to pick Bitterroot where Shop goes at. And now it's paved over. And so I had never done public art before. The process was kind of like overwhelming at first, but I kept on doing it because I was like, no, people need to know. And then also it was the greatest gift I could have given to my mother-in-law. I have points forever because I put her grandma in public art. And I was like, this is the greatest present the world will ever see.
Well, noted for how to impress my mother-in-law. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Shadow, do you want to, if you have anything else to add about, the impact that you're hoping that, your music will make?
Now that I've heard everybody talk too, it's brought up a couple other things. Firstly, just to touch on what everyone else has said, like the school system and how it kind of, it kind of silences a lot of stuff. And especially in my upbringing, I'm Native American. I grew up on the reservation, but I went to a very, very white school. And so when I went to school, me and my sister were like some of, 10 out of 160 students that are Native American growing up on the reservation. And so when I went to college and I learned about the history of natives, it was eye-opening to me as a Native American. I was mind blown when I went to school. And so that's something that I hope that I can bring light to, to the younger generation. And also, I hope to just maybe like shed light on things that just what I was talking about, that kids don't get to see until they're in college, just because of how the school system is. And they kind of don't talk about the brutal stuff until you're old enough, and that's something that I want to bring light to right away. And also what Ivy was touching on with the MMIW stuff. I'm working on a couple projects also for the CSKT tribes, and doing some MMIW stuff. Like I don't know if any of you guys seen, but I've done some stuff in the past on the pandemic and a lot of the COVID stuff. And it made this huge wave within our youth and within even in the indigenous people. And so we've got a lot of response back, like, can you try to do something for the MMIW epidemic, and also for like the vaccine, different things like that. And so that's another impact that I want to tackle within what I'm trying to do in my work.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about how, the reception has been to all of, all of this advocacy and, work that you've been doing?
Sure. Yeah. Up until now, I've been doing hip hop music and just music in general for probably about 10 to 12 years, from since I graduated high school until now. And everyone always says hard work pays off, and it constantly grows and grows and grows as you put yourself out there and you push for what you want. It naturally grows. But when I started to dive into the like the whole tribal, Native American hip hop side, it seemed to exponentially grow for me. And with the whole it was like a COVID campaign, and my guidelines were to talk about elders and how COVID affects elders and how the youth don't really take it seriously. And something to kind of get in their ear where it makes them feel like taking it seriously is kind of a good thing for them. And so after I released that song, which was called Protect Your People, it just like it literally went viral. And it was something I've never experienced. The reception of that alone was something I never experienced. And so as far as like me taking a direction with my work, I feel like that's the direction I need to go, because the reception was so good.
Awesome. And do you want to kind of speak a little bit to, the reception to your writing and all of the amazing work you've been doing?
Yeah. As a writer, I never really talk. I don't really know about people's reception unless they really hate it. like once I wrote a blog post, it wasn't a good blog post, about Justin Timberlake using settler colonial Western aesthetics to like forward his like image as like just a real guy. And I got so much hate mail, like people stalking me, blah, blah, blah. So that's the only time I've ever really had reception to my work. But I do want to say that Monica's piece, I want to talk about like that impact that has had on me as a person living in Missoula with like all these Blue Lives Matter, Trump signs, like back the blue things everywhere these past few months. I just like really appreciate that piece, just being able to look around and have that breath of just like empowerment and fresh air of amidst this like landscape of hate, especially being in such a beautiful place like Montana and seeing like beautiful trees with Trump signs on it. That piece definitely had an impact on me, and every time I see it. So I just wanted to shout that out. But yeah, I've only ever gotten hate mail about Justin Timberlake.
Oh my God. Okay, so before we started, we were talking about Free Britney. She has been freed.
Yes.
But I watched.
Yeah, people are starting to hate Justin now.
Yeah, I'm like, I hate Justin Timberlake too. Anyways.
Thank you.
Yeah. F that guy. Ivy, really quick, I think, we have like 7 minutes. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the reception has been to your art, your film?
Yeah, I think the reception has been, I don't want to sound, like, I don't know how to say it, but like, it's been really amazing. Since graduating, I've been able to work as a filmmaker and learn the craft even more after, and getting the opportunities, and then, getting the fellowships and going to different film festivals across the country, and just knowing that there's a lot of people who are wanting us to succeed and wanting us to tell this story, because we are telling it in a way that is very humane and very, I think, beautiful. And so I think the reception has been amazing, because of our work and because of all the activism we've done. We've worked on the ESPN short, we're doing work with Showtime. And so getting those opportunities and knowing that there are big entities like that are paying attention and wanting to create that change with us, I think that's an amazing thing. And I think the reception has been absolutely incredible.
It is. I mean, I'm looking forward to this film. And so, yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. And so, I guess, if there's any questions from the audience, about, any of this, feel free to put it in the Q&A chat. And I will also ask these amazing panelists if they would be willing to share, some of their work, websites, social media handles, how can people support you, music videos, documentary trailers, yeah. And I think in this conversation, a few things kind of came up for me, that I'm kind of connected it back to what is going on at our legislative session. So, right now there are a couple bills going through regarding missing and murdered Indigenous people, and my mind just blinked on that. But please call your representatives, your senators, to ask that they support those bills. It is one little piece of the puzzle that will help address this just a really complex problem. Also Indian Ed for All, we need that. And they're trying to take money away from that program to fund other things. So again, call your representatives and your senators and tell them, hey, no, leave that funding alone because we need it.